This is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. We're in a slightly different place today, and we're doing it face to face. So this is going to be quite exciting. And with me on this wonderful episode, I have Mario Behrendt, who is the Director of Engineering at Catkin.
Yeah.
Hi, Mario.
Hey, hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. So just as a kind of a start, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background about you and how you got into the industry, and then we can start talking about how business meets software. And
yeah, I mean, I've been in software engineering for about 16, 17 years now, and I got into it when I was in maybe 12 or 13,
Okay.
And I started to write websites because there wasn't really the website I wanted to be there. And I realized I can actually write it myself. And then when I became an adult, I realized you can actually get paid for it.
Okay.
So I naturally became a software engineer and then sort of worked as a software engineer and then later on as a lead and then department lead, head of, director, that kind of path. The majority of my career, pretty much all but one role, have been for one reason or another in e-commerce. So I might as well keep going down that route.
Okay. So you've kind of crafted a specialism in e-commerce.
I fell into it, yeah.
Yeah.
I just kept working for e-commerce companies until I decided, okay, I might as well double down on it.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, one big question that comes to my mind is that e-commerce has kind of changed because, I mean, everyone used to have custom platforms and then all the SaaS platforms. So do you work with the SaaS platforms or do you build something different?
Yeah, so certainly in the first half of my career, a lot of it was like traditional e-commerce, like literally selling, a product at a time, traditional sort of put it in the basket and then get it delivered. And then obviously Shopify and so software like that came around. Also self-hosted stuff like Magento and similar things. So early on I specialized in Magento because it was the biggest in Europe at the time. And then later on I transitioned into more D2C businesses. So directly selling to customers via a custom platform internally.
Okay. So that makes sense. You're not wrestling with the database schema from Magento anymore. So
and the extendability and you have a lot more freedom internally to, address the customer in the way you want.
Okay. So just kind of set the scene then. You've obviously been an individual contributor for a while, and then you started to manage software teams.
Yeah.
And when you started managing software teams, were that people in-house or was it external?
At the time, that was internal. Yeah. So perm employees and then a couple of contractors.
And did you do that in the UK or were you somewhere?
No, I started leading teams in Germany and then I came over to the UK and started to lead teams here.
Okay. How long did that go on for before you kind of started to do external teams? Because that's what we're going to get to. We're going to talk about that.
Sure.
But
I mean, obviously, it always depends on the business, cash flow, and what you're trying to build, and the existing team, obviously. So the first couple of roles were pretty much all internal plus the occasional sort of local contractor here and there. And then I really started to dig into nearshore, offshore type work at my last company at Tails, where we grew very, really rapidly into one of the biggest pet food businesses in Europe. And there we had a lot of opportunity to, utilize nearshore in particular to drive change for customers.
Okay. And so as you started on that journey, what was your first kind of, because obviously you had the internal teams and you were managing them,
Yeah.
and then you needed to go out and do some external. So what was the difference between hiring, because you were hiring internal people as well?
Yeah.
What was the difference?
In what sense?
Well, did you put them through the same interview process or?
Right. So initially we went with a slightly left field approach where we went to a company over in Bulgaria.
Okay.
And what they're offering is basically they handle all the sort of HR type stuff. They have an office there, but they hire engineers for you, basically. So you still have to go through the same process of hiring people, also convincing people in the first place to actually work for you because they're working for you, basically. They're not working for the company there. They're just sort of a shell that makes sure they have like some place to go and they have like HR and all of that stuff, accounting, etc. And the idea was behind that was to almost build a satellite team that really feels like one of our teams, but in a location that we can't access because we don't have an office there and we don't have an entity there. Driven by certainly costs at the time to some extent, but also just dipping into a different market. The company was located in Richmond in southwest London, which is a bit of a tricky one to hire for. This was pre-COVID, so we were in the office 5 days a week, and nobody wants to commute to Richmond because they all live like in commutable distance to Old Street, which is the other end of London almost. So it was like a way for us to potentially dip into a completely different market and build a team that is potentially easier to hire for than doing it locally in London, convincing people to come all the way to Richmond.
Yeah. So what was the early stages of that then? Did you pick a team in Bulgaria?
So we went there, obviously, like checked out the sort of the location.
Oh, you took a trip there?
Oh yeah, I went there, of course. Yeah. Checked out the offices, spoke to the staff there, make sure like we understand how people would be treated.
You weren't getting offices yourselves then?
No.
You were just looking, so you went around and did some visits to some places?
The company that offers the service had offices, and they would just stick the engineers basically in whatever configuration we wanted, and they would pay them whatever we thought makes sense, obviously plus their fee. And it was basically just they gave us this shell to hire into.
Yeah.
Obviously access to the market, and they would handle it, the recruitment, all of that kind of stuff. So we went there and checked out the area, checked out sort of the staff there, make sure I understand like what the engineers would be working with, what the environment would be. Is it, a concrete building, or is it a proper office? Do they have a coffee machine, that kind of stuff. And then it all sounded really good. And so we started to hire back from London. They would basically try to reach out in the market there locally. This was in Sofia mostly, and bring people in. We would vet them and ultimately obviously hire them if possible.
So when you say vet, what was that? What did that involve? Was it the same process you'd use for hiring local people or in Richmond?
Yeah, so it was a slightly truncated process because they would pre-vet them a little bit already compared to like obviously just a sort of organic application on the website that we would normally get in London. But the rest of the process would be pretty much the same. However, the problem we found was that given at the time we were only in the UK, we weren't in the national business yet, and we never launched in Bulgaria because it's quite a small market for pet food. Nobody knew who the hell we were.
Right, yeah.
But other companies were using the same service. So those candidates had the question of, should we work for this company we've never worked for through this shell company?
Oh, I get it.
Or should we work for the FT or for any of the other tech businesses from the US that we know about?
So what you're saying...
Uber was hiring massively there at the time.
Is your partner in Bulgaria who basically said, like, we're going to just pop up an office and we'll fill it.
Yep.
Yeah, candidates coming in for that. But then the candidates, they were actually saying to them, well, you could work for them, or you could work for them, or you could work for them, and so they'd actually get a choice.
Yes.
And they were all, the partner was hiring for all those people.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And there were other companies that would do roughly the same service, of course, or offer the same service. And yeah, as I said, like Uber was hiring massively at the time in that area. So it's like, okay, it's this gigantic US business I have heard about. They didn't actually offer Uber at the time in Bulgaria, but obviously everyone knew about them. Or there's other business that I've never heard about from the UK.
Right. And you're up against them.
Yeah, tough choice, right? So we actually struggled to get people through the door in the first place.
But you're a pet food. Like people love you're making it for dogs, right? The pet food. So maybe there were some people that were,
I'm sure there would be some.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the market is designed mostly for offshore or nearshoring.
Yeah.
Right? And quite frankly, also, as I said, the salaries were dictated by us plus their fee. We can't compete against Uber.
Okay, so even though Bulgaria has a lower cost of living and all of that stuff, people were still being hired by Uber on, reasonably high salaries.
Yeah, relative to the locals, yes.
So when you so this is an interesting thing. So when you looked at the comparison of what Uber was paying, was that comparable to someone being able to hire someone in Richmond still, or was it was lower?
It was definitely less, yes.
Okay.
But the cost of living there is so significantly lower than London. Even a reasonably decent mid-level salary here in London would get you a nice house there.
And the weather's better.
Arguably, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so you were vetting them, but on a condensed process. Yeah. Was there anything specific that you were doing when you were vetting them than you wouldn't do with hiring the local team?
We would normally skip the first screening interview because, again, they have been pre-vetted.
Yeah.
And I would basically offload that to the company. So I would tell them, like, ask the following things. Here's what I'm looking for. Give me the report. And so I can just save 30, 40 minutes from our team by them doing it, assuming they're not lying, of course. And then from there we can do...
Developers never lie.
No, of course not. Nor does the company that hires them for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just do the tech test and a tech panel of some description to just really hone in on the tech skills.
Okay. So basically, you got this partner, you could set up the office, slight problem because obviously Uber are hiring at the same time, so that was a bit of a challenge, but you got through that and you built a team.
I didn't say that.
Oh. It all went really, really well.
Yes, correct. And end of the story. And then we got rich.
Yeah.
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, Head Channel. Head Channel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They can also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
No, so actually we struggled so much with the local markets because, again, nobody knew the brand. There were many US brands that were hiring in the same way, in the same area, many UK brands that are known internationally, like the FT, for instance, and other companies. And so we were really struggling to just compete with them, mostly, not even because of the finances, but mostly because of brand. It's a big thing. And if you can have Uber on your CV in Bulgaria versus a company that nobody knows, you don't have to think twice. And so it got to the point where we flew over again and we were hosting meetups just to like make people aware of like, why do we even have engineers? Like, what's exciting about us? What are the complex problems we are solving, which we had many of. But it didn't help. We were bending over backwards and flying engineers over there to give talks and stuff.
At meetups?
Yeah. We were hosting our own.
Wow. And was that quite well attended?
We had attendance, yeah. But then we spoke to the engineers afterwards and they were like, yeah, cool. But
thanks for the beer. Thanks for the pizza. Thanks for the chat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, I think that we lost a solid 6 months on that.
Wow.
Just trying to make it work, if I remember correctly.
So you actually just lost 6 months trying to make it work?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's a bit of a lesson. What would the partner say about all of this? Because obviously you kind of got on board with them because they promised you the outcome. I
mean, they are getting paid based on how many folks they have in that building.
Right.
If that person works for us or not, doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But they must have sold you the idea a little bit.
Sure. But what can they do? I mean, they did get people through to us, but frankly, those were mostly low quality candidates.
Right.
So we were never even close to saying yes to someone out of the few people we had. And I guess I should also mention we had a very high bar. So,
yeah, I'm guessing this just from the way you're talking. Yeah.
So in the UK, at the time we hired about 1 out of 400 candidates.
Yeah, that's quite a high bar.
Yeah. So we obviously lowered the bar a little bit, knowing this is sort of nearshore and it's temporary hires. But we didn't want to drop it too much because those folks would start to work on quite impactful stuff quite quickly. And we can't have that obviously be some sort of dumpster fire. But yeah, the number of candidates was incredibly low and then the quality was not quite there.
Right.
And then we tried to get some excitement, get people in the door. But if you don't have the brand recognition, like in the UK, we were already known to like almost half the pet parents. We were on TV, etc. So you probably someone heard of us, right?
Yeah. If you've got a dog, you must know about Tails, right?
Whereas in Bulgaria, nobody. Also, the culture is different. They have dogs, but they just don't have them as closely necessarily as, like, say, a UK household does.
It's definitely got closer over the last 20, 30 years than it used to be.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Yeah. So it was a real struggle, and we never actually managed to get a pipeline together that made us feel confident, because we're not looking to hire 1 or 2 people. We knew we needed somewhere between 5 and 15 just to get started.
So your backlog was stuffed, basically.
I mean, we were making progress on the perm hiring in the UK. Yeah. So on that front, sort of it worked. But obviously,
a lot of interviews.
Yes.
That's a lot of interviews.
Yes.
It's almost like weeks and weeks of back-to-back interviews, it feels like. Was it like that? Is that how it felt?
Probably, yeah. I mean, we did spend a lot of time on interviews, of course, yeah. But I still believe it makes sense, because you're gonna get the dividends once you hire the right person.
Okay, yeah. And what kind? I mean, only because it's strangely on my mind right now. Kind of, did you put people through tests?
Yeah.
What kind of tests?
It's
a bit of a contentious point right now.
Nothing crazy, to be honest. So for perm hires, it was a pretty standard tech test, to be honest. Nothing to catch people out on. It was take home, so we wouldn't like watch them or have them record anything or anything like that. It's
just face to face. Just
and that.
How do you navigate? How do you navigate a structure with leaf nodes? God, I'm really rusty these days, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, we would ask a bunch of tech questions then afterwards. Yeah. Based on the tech test, like why
so rusty? Sorry.
Why did you do it this way, or what is there anything you missed maybe, and then just ask a bunch of questions on the CV, like the tech that they had on the CV, and then there was some sort of like a cultural / value interview, and yeah, we had pretty much each stage 80% of people dropped.
Wow.
The thing is, I know a lot of engineers don't want to do tech tests, especially if they're seniors, but then most seniors fail the tech test, so I can't not do it because
that is true. That is true. I mean, I obviously I haven't written any code in Ang. Well, that's not strictly true, but not really in proper for a few years. So don't ask me a test. I know, but I can't articulate it because I've lost all the language. Like the language is falling out the back of my head.
Sure.
So I'd have to go back in and search things. But there again, I'm not coming for a test with you, so that's good news. Yeah. That's good news. If this doesn't work out, I will be. This podcast doesn't work out. Okay, so because it is a bone of contention that a lot of people don't like technical tests. They just want to talk and show it that way. But of course, the other side of that is that when you do that, you have a kind of a human connection, and then you say no to someone, and then they feel really put out that you've said no. Because they've kind of built a relationship. So yeah, I it's difficult.
I mean, especially for a senior, you need both. I need to know you can actually write code because ultimately that's what you're getting paid for.
Yeah.
But I also need to know you can communicate.
Yes.
Right. You're going to work with stakeholders. You're going to work with PMs, PDs, other people across the business, other functions that are non-technical. So you have to be able to dumb it down almost to those individuals to make sure you can communicate issues, delays, complexity, etc.
Communication. It's a very, very important thing that
and to be fair, a lot of senior engineers are really good at it. So good that they don't want to do tech tests because they can talk their way out of it.
Yeah. Exactly. So go on then. So the next bit of the story is you tried to hire, you spent 6 months, kind of wasted a load of stuff, time, money, pizza. And then, so what did you do? Did you find a company that would just take the whole thing off your hands?
Yeah. So then obviously we recognized that approach is not going to be particularly successful.
The augmentation approach?
Well, the approach of trying to hire a new team through some sort of like a vessel company of sorts.
Vessel company, yeah.
Whatever they want to call themselves. Sure, we could have gone into a different country, but we would have had the same issue. Right? The only thing that would have worked would have been the UK, and then we might as well just hire perms.
Yeah.
So I basically started to go around and talk to probably a good 30, 40 companies across, from Spain, Portugal to Poland, Czech Republic, Ukraine at the time, Belarus, etc., and interview them. Like, what can you offer? Why would you think you can do this? What's your setup? And ultimately, I landed on 2 companies who were effectively agencies who had literally thousands of engineers working for them already. They would just assign them to you.
Yeah.
Right. Standard Nearshore. But I really made sure I vetted the companies. I asked them to give me a bunch of engineers I can interview before we even signed any contracts, just so I know the quality of the engineers. And a lot of them didn't have good engineers.
No.
Because they just hire whatever is on the market.
And also, if you'd signed the contract with them, they would go and open up an office and then go out and hire people, right? So
in this case, we would actually get people off the bench.
Okay.
So that was a big one. Was, as I mentioned, we needed anywhere between 5 and 15 people. That's what we already knew at the time.
Yeah.
So one company I spoke with, who were based in, I believe, Tenerife at the time, they sounded really good. Great, very high bar. But they had, if I remember correctly, maybe 50 people in total. Out of that, maybe 35 engineers. And they had 1 or 2 people on the bench. So they can't deliver quickly enough for me. So I'm sure they're a great company, but they weren't big enough. And so the 2 companies I settled on had multiple offices in Poland and Ukraine at the time. And they had, I believe, they had about 4,000 engineers across these offices already there, already vetted, already hired, already having worked there for several months, if not years.
Yeah.
So they already have a performance track record, etc. So I can just go in and be almost like on a menu, like I need the following 5 things on that list, and they just spit out a bunch of people for me. Then I can interview pre-vetted people that already have a track record with that company, and that makes the interview process shorter. It makes the quality of the people much higher, and I have access to people because they're already there. And that was obviously much more successful.
Okay, that's good news. Good news. But I mean, then they augment into your team, so you manage them and...
Yeah, so we ended up basically 2 different versions. One is where we basically got a whole team in for instance, we launched a sister brand at the time. So we brought a whole team in, a couple of engineers, a QA, a PM, I believe a PD as well at the time.
Okay.
And just have like a whole software engineering squad that was overseen by one of my engineering leads, just to keep an eye on them. But they were like almost independent.
Yeah.
And they just, here's the brief, get on with it. And then we also literally augmented existing engineering teams. So I had 8 or 9 teams at the time. And some of them had between 1 and 3 nearshore engineers augmented into the team, basically seen as a normal perm engineer as far as like, integration.
Yeah. And that worked out really, really well.
I mean, I think it depends on obviously your culture, your ways of working, because those folks are remote at the time, especially before COVID. We were not remote. We were all in the office 5 days a week. So now we had to like transition into hybrid working already, which to be fair helped us when obviously COVID came up a year later or so. But it also comes down to, or depends on which projects you put people on or what kind of projects. I think the augmentation approach is a bit hit and miss because it depends also what that engineer is working on, how long you keep them in the team.
Yeah.
If you bring someone in for like a month, you're probably going to have net negative output because of the onboarding costs and just them being remote, etc. But I think for distinct projects, it works really, really well.
Okay, so does that bring us? Doesn't bring us completely up to date though. So what happened next?
Well, it's not quite up to date. I guess ultimately it worked out quite well. As I mentioned, we worked with 2 different companies, and then we kept spinning up new teams and sort of basically usually actually we spun up teams with nearshore resources, and then once we found product market fit, we would bring hire internal, or bring people internally, or move them around within the existing team, and then put those folks onto the next thing, for instance, or keep augmenting the existing teams
because you want to keep the knowledge in house, right?
Yeah, I mean, once you have product market fit, you're probably better off having internal folks working with the rest of the functions, because the nearshore folks, they can work with some internal functions, but they're never going to be as integrated, obviously, as your permanent engineers.
Yeah,
the communication will always be a bit of an issue, and just also the ways of working. They're not always available because they have like internal meetings with their actual managers, so to speak, as well to measure performance. But yeah, I think ultimately it went quite well. Mainly, I think because we treated them like employees. Because ultimately, obviously, they're still humans, they're still engineers.
Yeah, cool.
They want to. They're looking for the same stuff as your internal folks. They want to progress in their careers. They want to work on interesting stuff. They want to have an impact. They want to work with great people. And by doing so, having a high bar internally, but also keeping that high bar with those folks. Although again, the quality was much higher, so I think we rejected 20% rather than 100. We got people much in more quickly, but because they all saw each other as great people to work with, they stayed much longer within our teams because they can just ask for...
I was going to ask you about the churn and the turnover.
Yeah, we had very little at the time because, as I said, like they liked the way we worked.
Yeah.
They had like a manager in our team that they can just speak freely to. If a process didn't work, they were raising it with us and we can fix it. We treated them like they work for us.
Yeah.
Or with us, I should say. And so they liked to work on those projects. They didn't ask to be moved around.
Yeah.
They were the only guy that ever left at the time. He was promoted by the company, so I couldn't say anything to keep him. But actually, we did get him back ultimately in his new role in a different project.
At a higher rate.
Significantly higher, yes.
That's what happens when you get promoted.
But he was very good, so.
Yeah, well, it works out, doesn't it? Okay, so what do you think? So if anyone's going on this journey, what are your top tips?
Obviously, like first find a good company. Like really grill them. The first chat is going to be a sales chat, so that one is useless. Second chat, talk
That's
to
just
like...
niceties.
I mean, yeah, we can do everything, and we're going to be the cheapest on the market, etc., etc. Doesn't matter. The next chat is the first one that actually matters. So talk to someone like a head of delivery or something along those lines, whatever they have there. Someone that actually runs the engineering teams.
Yeah.
And ask them about like, how do you hire? Why did you hire those folks versus the others? Why do you think you have better engineers than the other company that is 2 blocks down in the next office? Why should we work with you?
Yeah.
Why do you think you can provide better engineers that have better communication skills and better technical skills than the other company? Why are actually those engineers, why are they working for you?
Yeah, why aren't they going to work for the other company?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So basically interview them on how they
hard
get...
questions to answer.
And then, as I said, interview a bunch of engineers. Sure, they're going to give you the good ones, right? But it gives you some, like, at least you can compare the top end of each of these companies.
Yeah.
Right.
It matters about your budget as well, though, right? Because you can't,
of course,
you can't go in right at the top if you're not paying the top numbers.
I mean, it is obviously cheaper than hiring in the UK, but it's not significantly cheaper anymore.
No.
Especially Poland is almost on par.
I would say Poland's probably ahead, actually.
I guess. It depends on how much you pay, I guess, but yes.
Yeah. That is not cheaper, which is interesting because obviously Poland's GDP is about to overtake the UK's as well. But anyway, that's a whole different, we're getting on to a political thing.
I didn't do any of that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the kind of tips. But if you were someone who hasn't got a technical background, you're starting, you don't have a technical person with you, could they navigate this journey, or is it?
I mean, you can, but as with everything, if you don't have experience in this topic, you probably should get yourself someone, at least on an advisory basis, that can help you.
Like a fractional CTO, maybe.
Or literally just pay someone a few grand to get the company in for you.
Yeah, and find the right one.
Yeah, just some sort of an advisor that just spends a month on giving you 2 or 3 options with the pros and cons of each.
Yeah.
If you don't have the time and the knowledge to do so.
Yeah.
Or the time to gain the knowledge.
Yeah. Understood. Okay. Right. So that went really, really well.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. And now you're not at Tails anymore.
No, so I recently took on a new role as Director of Engineering at Catkin.
And how's that going?
So really well, I think. We have currently purely an internal team, both on the tech side as well as like PM and PD. And we're hiring at the moment. So obviously, if anyone's interested, please apply. We are currently at about 1 out of 200 applicants we're hiring. So I've gotten a bit soft recently.
Yeah, old age, it'll do it to you.
It is what it is. But yeah, obviously, I'm still keen on working with nearshore companies. Actually, I spoke to one this morning.
Why would you choose to? Yeah, why would you choose?
Well, as I mentioned, I think if you have any, so I think a good example would be, for instance, if you have a website and you want a mobile app. Those are 2 different, completely distinct code bases. Sure, there's like the API connection, but outside of that, the mobile team can act pretty independently. If you don't have anyone available internally that can write code like that, especially if you want to go like purely native on Android and iOS respectively, you could bring in 2 or 3 engineers near shore, bring in a PM, bring in a PD, and have them bang out a mobile app while your existing team is focusing on the much more impactful stuff that is already, that is directly driving impact for existing customers. Because mobile app is obviously always a bit of a gamble. And then if it works well, you could keep those folks, or you bring it internally, or a mixture of both. So any distinct project, I think, is always something where I would definitely at least strongly entertain if nearshore makes sense. The more domain knowledge that is required, the more, like, both on the actual domain of the industry that you're in, as well as the technical domain of the change in which the change has to happen, the more I'm leaning towards using obviously internal folks, because they're going to be much quicker and produce probably also better output. They understand the business better, they understand the customer better. And then anything in between, more on the augmentation side, is I think I would go for nearshore if we're talking like I need peak resource. So let's say we have this big project, I've got half the team on it, but I need another 20 people on something else. I just don't have enough people, but also I know it's going to be about 3 to 6 months, and then it's going to calm down again. I can't hire 10 people just for the sake of having 6 months of their time. So that's where nearshore can be really helpful as well, of course.
Yeah. I was thinking about whether there's a quadrant you can draw.
I'm sure that's
that kind of maps that out. Because, I think what you're trying to say is the people, the engineers that are nearer to the core of the business need you're more comfortable with people being in-house, right?
Yeah, the closer it is to the core of the business and the domain and customer experience, as well as the more tangled up it is.
Yeah.
The more you want to be in-house, yeah.
Yeah, but if you suddenly decided strategically as a business that you were going to have, something on a TV app that everyone could install on their televisions, exactly. Like you'd push that out to a further out team.
I would always obviously look for internal growth first. Is this something someone in the team has enough experience on, maybe using something like React Native or similar frameworks where you can use some of the language the team is actually capable of working with, to have some internal growth in those folks if they're interested. if that's not the case, then I think Nearshore is certainly an option. Obviously, you could just hire those folks in the UK if you're like really certain that this will pay off. But for anything where you have to find product market fit first, or it's sort of a side quest of some sort,
quest, yeah.
You probably don't want to hire people just to then potentially have to fire them again, because that's not great. And that's, I think, what Nearshore is really good at.
Yeah, really, really good at. Yeah. How do you handle, though, when the in-house team go, oh, that's a really exciting project, why am I not on that?
I mean, quite frankly, I think the internal team always has to come first. If they are excited about the project and there is a reasonable way of getting them involved in it, then it's definitely something I will try to make happen. But there will be occasions where actually it's the wrong business decision, because spending 8 hours of their time on something else will just provide so much more value for customers and therefore the business than working on this side project. Or it's just too far of a stretch or leap for them to work on it because of, technical knowledge, let's say, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. So just overall, where do you think the future's going?
Oh, God.
I mean, I'm not going to say the words, but you know what I'm thinking. Everyone knows. I'll try and ask.
Actually, these days, it doesn't actually narrow it down too much.
Well, will we need engineers anymore?
Yeah, I ask myself that question quite a lot.
Oh.
Well, ultimately, will I have a job in 5 years? Or will I can't just lead a bunch of AI. So I think for the time being...
You did see that paper from Apple, the one about not being able to reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, can we? I'm not sure.
Well, that's probably why people aren't passing your test.
Yeah, it might be. I think we're good for a while, for now, yeah. I think when you look at AI, I think is already quite good at coming up with new applications. Like just getting something off the ground very quickly.
Boilerplate.
Yeah. And then maybe another 5% from there. But if you go into a brownfield system and you go, okay, we have to refactor this whole thing and move this from, payment method A to payment method B, or we have to completely change the way we do ordering, or the subscription handling has to do the following now, it's incredibly bad at it. It lacks the real understanding of the domain at the moment, and it's just going to produce a bunch of gibberish.
Yeah.
But obviously we're moving really, really quickly in this space, and it is probably going to keep growing exponentially. So what I just said might be wrong in 2 months.
Watch this space. Mario, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, all the best for the future. And I hope that, take Catkin all the way wherever it's going. I don't know where it's going.
We're going to sell cat food on the Mars, yes.
Yes, you're going to sell cat food on Mars. That's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.